Tractate Pesachim. So let's begin. The bottom of Tzaddik Chesed on base 98b. The Gemara had, the Mishnah had told us various scenarios where if two groups, somebody lost their Korban Pesach and they didn't know where it is, so the group sent somebody out to go find it, and whether they designated that person to shecht on their behalf or the person who went to find the Korban asked the group to go shecht on their behalf, and depending on what words they used, that would either invalidate one Korban or the other, depending on which one came first. However, if neither of them said anything, one went out and decided to shecht the Korban on behalf of the group, and did so. So in that case, both of their Korbanos are going to be valid. So the silence actually brings about that both Korbanos are valid. Taner Rabbanan, from here we learned this at the bottom of Tzaddik Chesed at base, the last two lines. Amar Rabbi, Amar Lehem, V'amru Loi. If they spoke to each other and demanded and told each other to bring the Korban Pesach, you can only eat of the first. But if he didn't say anything, and they didn't say anything to him, neither of them are obligated to each other, and they can bring the Korban Pesach properly. Each one can eat their own Korban Pesach. So at the top of Tzaddik Testament base, we're at the top of 99, Aleph A. From here we can see that it is wise for people to be silent, for Chachamim, even wise people to be silent. And how much more so for fools? Shanema says that a fool who is silent actually is considered wise. So the last part of the ninth parak before we begin Rabbi Pesachim, just to close off the last subject, and this is a 99a at the top. So the Mishnah had said, if an individual person who had his own Korban Pesach and had his lamb for Pesach confused with another individual person who had a Korban Pesach. So each one had only one person designated on the Korban Pesach, and they confused which one is which. So each one will take one lamb, and they say to each other, look, if this lamb is mine, so that's great. However, if this lamb is yours and I'm not designated on your lamb, so I can't eat it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take someone and invite someone else that's not been in either of our group and invite him onto my lamb. And he's going to join my Seder. And you do the same. And then we're going to move. I'm going to move to your lamb. You're going to move to mine. And this way, we still have someone originally from the original group on the lamb. And therefore, I'm allowed to leave. And you have someone on your lamb from the original group, so you're allowed to leave. And we say like this: if this is my original lamb, well, then I'm leaving and moving to the other. And if this is not my original lamb, so then I'm not leaving. I'm leaving the lamb for you, and I'm going to go back to mine that was originally mine. However, the problem is that what I said is that, I can leave my lamb because someone from the original group is on. The Gemara says he's not in the original group. In fact, I'm just pulling him in right now in order to do this shtick. So must be our opinion of our mission is not like Rabbi Yehuda the Tani, because we learned it says if the house is going to be insignificant or not large enough to have a lamb, but from there we learn that you're allowed to leave. Once you're on a group, you're allowed to leave your group and join a new group. As long as one person of the group, of the original group, is still there. Different Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. And Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't have to be somebody from the original group, as long as at no point was the Pesach without any group at all. That means, let's say there are 10 people on the group, 9 leave, wait for more people to come, and then the 10th one can leave. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Filatem Rabbi Yehuda. We can say even our mission is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Since Rabbi Yehuda also has an opinion that you never bring the Korban Pesach for an individual. That means you must have multiple people as a group on the Korban Pesach, not an individual. So when he designated the Korban Pesach for himself, even though there is no designated second person, by definition there must be another person. So the next person he brings on is a part of the original group because they have to be there. So therefore, when his Korban Pesach got confused and he brings someone else in and says, you remain as the original and I'm going to move over to the other, and this way, either way, I have my Korban Pesach, that would be valid because from the start there must be somebody else joining this Carbon Pesach. He's a part of the original group. And Rav Ashi says that the text, the words of the Mishnah indicate this indeed. The Ketani, if it says so too it says in our Mishnah a group of five of 5 people on one Carbon Pesach, and 5 people on another, and 5 on another. 5 such groups of 5 can also do this deal of where if they confuse their Carbon Pesachs, they can one person from each group can swap and join the other groups. Now, why do you need 5? Even if it's a group of 4, they'll just bring someone new in. But if it was 5 and 4, that would not be enough. Isn't it because you need always at least one of the original group still with the Carbon Pesach? So we see that our Mishnah works even according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and on the account of that you always need at least one person from the original group there. And that's why if you have 5 groups and each group has at least 5 people, you can also resolve the confusion of which lamb belongs to which group by fanning out. Each group of 5 now splits into the 5 lambs, and this way on each lamb they're going to at least have one of the original. With this we complete the 9th parak Mishahaya, and we should come back to you Bez Hashem Yisbarach, and we start on Tzadi Testament base 99b, the world famous, probably the most famous parak in Shas, Arvei Pesachim, relevant to the halachas of the Seder. B'siyata Shmaya, we will go through not only the Gemara, but we'll try and also deal with Tosfos and some of the halachas, because this is so pertinent and so relevant to every day. Not only Pesach, many halachas that pertain to every day, many halachas that pertain to Shabbat, every Shabbos, and for sure to Pesach, which is so important. So we begin. Tzadi Testament base 99b in Pesachim, Erev Pesachim, or as the text may be, Arvei Pesachim, the evenings of Pesach, meaning the night after you complete the Carbon Pesach, because that's what we were talking about until now. You complete the Carbon Pesach, and now that evening, the evenings of the first night of Pesach, Samuch LeMincha, close to Mincha, Lo Yochel Adam Ad Shetech. A person may not eat until it becomes night. Now we need to stop and introduce a couple ideas. Number one, the term Mincha is not only the time that one, the davening Mincha, the afternoon prayer of Mincha, but it's a time in halachic time. There's, as we saw earlier when we talked about the Carbon Pesach, that there's the day, halachic day, assuming sunrise or the beginning of the day is at 6 a.m. and the end of the day is 6 p.m. Just to make it to give an easy example. So halachic day would always be split into 12 parts. This would be true even if the day begins at 4 a.m. and it ends at 10 p.m. It would also be split into 12 parts. But for the example's sake, we'll always use 6 o'clock as the beginning of the day, 6 o'clock at the end of the day, and noon as halachic noon. So the halacha would be is that there's time that you can daven shachris. There's halachic noon, which is exactly mid-time between the beginning of the halachic day and the end of the halachic day. And then starts the afternoon, which we saw that the Carbon Pesach can be brought at 6.5 hours into the day, meaning a half hour halachic past noon, past midday. And the reason for that is, as we saw, was in order to be able to tell when there's a shadow already from the sun being more towards the west, and you know for sure that it's past midday. This is called Shesha Mechza, 6.5 hours into the day, or half into the 7th hour. That's when Mincha begins. You're allowed to daven Mincha, as you can bring the Carbon Tamid, the afternoon daily offering, the Tamid offering. So too you can daven Mincha. So that is called Mincha Gedola. When there's a lot of time left for Mincha, there's a large time for Mincha, meaning from a half hour afternoon to the end of the Mincha time. However, there's also another time, 3 hours later, where you split the afternoon, 3 hours and 3 hours, but really only 2.5 hours left because we started a half hour late in order to ensure that we have that we're past noon. So 3.5 hours later, meaning 9.5 hours into the day, or halfway through the 10th hour of the day, or 2.5 hours halachic before the end of the day, you're going to have another time called mincha ketana, when there's just a little bit of mincha left, or part of the mincha time, the small section of mincha left. So these are called mincha. The Gemara is going to ask later, what are we referring to in our Mishnah? Because the Mishnah says, now that we introduce the concept of mincha, that Erev Pesach, samacha mincha, close to mincha, meaning a half hour prior, you may no longer eat. You can't eat because, as we'll see in the Gemara, this could be true on every day. This could be true on Erev Shabbos as well, and Erev Yontif as well. But for Pesach in particular, you're not allowed to eat because you have a mitzvah that night. That mitzvah is eating matzah. And since you have a mitzvah eating matzah, if you're going to eat so close to the evening, you're going to end up not eating the matzah with any desire. Or, as the Gemara is going to tell us later, you may actually be full and not and have no appetite at all, and then it may not even be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of eating, because if it's achila gasa, if you're eating and you're stuffing yourself, that doesn't count as eating, and so you will not have fulfilled the mitzvah. But over here, the Rashi and Rashbam say even if you're not going to be that full, but it's still not going to be the best way of eating a mitzvah. There is a hidur mitzvah. There's an adornment of the mitzvah to eat something where the mitzvah is eating, to eat it with a geschmack, to eat it with a desire, with an appetite. And if you have no appetite left, that's not the way to do this mitzvah. So one may not eat in order to eat the mitzvah of matzah, to be able to do that matzah mitzvah with the proper appetite. So samach l'mincha, a half hour prior to mincha, which could be either at noon, a half hour prior to 6.5 hours into the day, which we'll see later, or actually, as the halacha is, a half hour prior to mincha ketana, which means 9 hours into the day, or the beginning of the 10th hour, one would not be allowed to eat. This is the samach. This is close to mincha. So lo yachal adam, a person shall not eat until it becomes night, and this is true specifically for Karban Pesach, or for matzah and Pesach, because as we know, Shabbos and Yontif, one may bring in the Yontif early. And in fact, there is a mitzvah to bring Shabbos and Yontif in early to Shabbos and to Yontif. The addition, time that we have of Shabbos and Yontif is based on we learn it from Yom Kippur, where the Torah says that you will, the 9th day of Tishrei, in the evening, you will begin the fast. Now, obviously, the fast is on the 10th day of Tishrei, yet it says in the 9th, because you have to start earlier. You can't start at the buzzer right when the fast begins. You have to start early, and this is the concept of Tosefah Shabbos and Tosefah Yantav. So you always have the obligation to add a little bit to Shabbos and Yantav. And over here as well for Pesach, you can add it. So maybe I'll just bring in Yantav early, and then I can just eat my Seder early. So here the Mishnah says no. Even though that's true for Shabbos and Yantav, Pesach you cannot, because the Torah says that the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach is Balayla, that night. And matzah maror also are you will eat the meat this night, and you eat the matzah al matzah samar mechlu. You eat it with matzah maror, so they too have to be eaten that night. And in fact, we say in the Haggadah, we say perhaps from the beginning of the month. So say no, that's what it says on this date. Perhaps from earlier in the day. That's what it says no balayla zeh. So in the Seder itself, we say that you can only begin even the mitzvah of telling the story of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim also would have to be that night. So you cannot bring in the Yontif early. You must begin at once it is already dark, and therefore it says in the Mishnah, you may not eat from earlier in the day until until it's dark. You may not eat in order to eat the matzah with an appetite. We'll get back to this, Be'ez Hashem, as time allows, because I want to address this year's Pesach, where you have Shabbos, Erev Pesach, and there's a mitzvah of Suda Shlishas, eating a third meal on Shabbos, if and how one would fulfill that. So the first halach of the Mishnah says, Erev Pesach, Samach LeMincha, and a half hour prior to the Mincha time, which is either 6.5 hours into the day, is Mincha time, so a half hour before that would be noon, or it's 9.5 hours into the day, so at 9 hours into the day, beginning of the 10th hour, or 3 hours before the end of the halachic day, when you would not be able to eat anymore, and you can't eat until nightfall. And what one may not eat, we'll get to Be'ez Hashem as soon as we can just finish the Yamid, and then we'll come back to this halach. Now, it says, even a poor person shall not eat until they lean. There are two chidushim here, two ideas that it says why it mentions even a poor person. One, that even a poor person who might be hungry anyhow, so they'll eat the matzah with an appetite. Nevertheless, it's uniform. No one shall eat in the afternoon in order to eat the matzah with an appetite. Also, what's the reason for this mitzvah we know of leaning Yesev, Haseba, that we lean at the Seder when we eat the matzah, and when we say the Haggadah, and when we drink the 4 cups, etc., we lean. What's this idea of leaning? Derech Cherus says, we'll see more about this in the Gemara, in order to have a show of Cherus, of freedom, and a show of self-sovereignty. You lean because this is the way that in Roman times people would lean in order to eat. That showed a form of freedom and mastery of oneself, as opposed to being in bondage. And so we lean. Now the question is, what about when leaning is not comfortable to me, or I'm actually a poor man, or I'm actually not free and able to serve myself? So do I lean anyhow? So the Mishnah says even a poor person who, for them, they may not be an upper class person. Nevertheless, they only eat when they are leaning, because it's the concept that we're showing. We're showing that Hashem took us out of Egypt, and that we have the ability to be ourselves, to have Torah, and to define ourselves in our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so therefore we lean regardless of whether of what our status is, regardless of how wealthy or not we are. And that's the chiddush of this Mishnah that says, Afilu Arin Sheb Yisrael, even a poor person, Le'yochal, may not eat until the evening, even if he maybe have an appetite in any case, and Achi Yesef, and may not eat until that evening. Even a poor person is going to leave. The next halach, it says, and they shall not make any less for him than 4 cups of wine. What does this mean, they? That means that there is an obligation on the community, on the tzedakah of the community, to ensure that everybody, even the poorest of people, have the ability to have 4 cups of wine, and no less than 4 cups of wine. So it is a communal responsibility. They shall not have any less for him, even a poor person. And the 4 cups of wine is also a show of the self-sovereignty and freedom, as we have the 4 terms of redemption in the pasuk, where it says, I take you out. I will save you. I will redeem you. And I will take you for me as a nation. The 4 terms of, or the 4 levels of redemption that Hashem says, for each one there's another cup, and on each one of the cups we'll see there is another mitzvah to do, or set of mitzvahs to do. And so these 4 cups are a communal obligation for each individual, even for the poor, and therefore we have to provide it. And as Tosfos points out, it is as opposed to on a Shabbos and other times where one person can make Kiddush and fulfill it for everyone. It is, even though the term in the Mishnah is Yifches Loi, for him, really the obligation is to provide not only for the individual, but for every single one of the members of the household. Tosfos deals with whether this is whether the ability to fulfill the mitzvah of telling the stories and the mitzvah of the 4 cups, which is can be fulfilled by one person on behalf of everyone, like what we do for Kiddush. And as the explanation is that that you cannot do that because just like matzah, I can't eat matzah for you, and maror, I can't eat maror for you. So too, I cannot drink the 4 cups, which is a similar obligation. That's one of the explanations as to why this is a mitzvah where every member or every person at the Seder has to have their own 4 cups of wine, says their own Kiddush, and fulfills the mitzvah themselves. And this is the communal obligation for taking care of the poor to make sure that they have arba kosos and in fact matzah as well. One of the first halachas that we have in the Shulchan Aruch in regards to Pesach is the obligation to provide ma'os chitin, money for wheat. People would make their own matzah back when. Now we don't do that. We purchase matzah, so the funds to people that don't have the ability to either have to provide funds or actually matzah and wine for them. Now, not only is this for a regular poor person, even if somebody goes to a soup kitchen, which means that they don't even have funds for 2 meals. That's the lowest level of the meaning someone who has the least amount of money, and which is somebody that actually eats from the soup kitchen. The halacha is you can only go to a soup kitchen if you don't have enough funds for even 2 meals, and yet somebody like that needs to have the 4 cups of wine, and the community has to provide it for him. And if they don't, then it would be their obligation to try and seek out a way to have 4 cups of wine and matzah that night. And also somebody that eats from a tamchoy would have to lean at night, and also should not eat until the evening in order to eat the matzah with the desire. Now, the Gemara now goes back to the first halacha. The first halacha was Erev Pesach, you cannot eat from the time close to mincha, meaning a half hour prior to the mincha time. So the Gemara says this is not a unique mitzvah for Erev Pesach. This is true every Shabbos in Yom Tov. My area Erev Pesachim. Why did you mention specifically Erev Pesach? Even Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, you may not eat close to the evening. Now, this was relevant this year for Purim, and it's going to be relevant this year for Pesach. You have an obligation to sometimes eat a meal in the afternoon, and or eat a meal on a day, and that comes up to Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we had this on Purim. There was a mitzvah to eat a meal on Purim, and you have Shabbos coming, and you're not supposed to eat a meal close to Shabbos in order to eat the Shabbos meal with appetite. So what do you do? So there Purim is passed already, but as we talked about in the halacha shir in introduction to Purim, some have a meal in the morning, but usually we don't have a meal in Purim morning on account of the mitzvahs. There are many mitzvahs to do. You have to give mishloach manos, you have to give matanas lavyonim, give support. Obviously, before that, you would be hearing the Megillah, so that takes up a lot of the morning. And so you wouldn't have time to eat in the morning, so you would have to eat in the afternoon. The afternoon is already the time that you're coming close to Shabbos. Nevertheless, the halacha is, as the Ramah says in Hilchos Shabbos, that when there's an obligatory meal for that day, so that day's obligation of a meal will supersede the halacha of not eating close to Shabbos. Nevertheless, as a general rule, the halacha is that close to Shabbos, one would not eat. Even just sitting down to a proper meal, washing and making a big meal, one should avoid, if there's no necessity, even the whole day. There's a halachas about this. But this Bryce is going to tell us that the similar or the exact text of our Mishnah applies to Shabbos as well. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brisa, a person shall not eat in the afternoons or the evenings of Shabbos and Yom Tov prior to Shabbos and Yom Tov, mina mincha lamala, from mincha and onward. So that seems to be a halacha regardless of just Erev Pesach. This is true for every Yom Tov, Sukkot, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, as well as Shabbos every single week. So what's the big idea that we have a Mishnah to tell us that Erev Pesach you can't eat every Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. And the reason there is Kadeshi Yikanes Shabbos Kashut Rabbi Yehuda says in order to enter Shabbos with an appetite, so that the mitzvah is v'karasa Shabbos oneg. Shabbos has to be a pleasure, so you have to have a meal that's full of delicacies, and you're enjoying Shabbos. It's a pleasure, a delight, and if you're stuffed, it's not going to be a delight. So Rabbi Yehuda says you can't eat min mincha l'mayla. Rabbi Yossi, however, says Rabbi Yossi says the rest of that every Shabbos and Yontif you may eat even up to nightfall. No such problem of eating till the evening. Amar Rav Huna. So Rav Huna said, "Letzrichel Rabbi Yossi." You're right. Our Mishnah is needed according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi who says that all year round you're allowed to eat. Nevertheless, for Erev Pesach, you're not allowed to, because matzah is a specific, the need to eat matzah. First of all, matzah is a d'oraisa obligation, a Torah obligation to eat. And if you're going to be stuffed, you will not fulfill the eating. It doesn't count as eating when you are stuffed and you're really not able to eat anymore. So that's problem number one. But even more, because the eating is a form of the mitzvah, so having a desire, having an appetite, actually is the beautification of the mitzvah itself. Where Shabbos, the mitzvah is just to have pleasure. So if you're may also be pleasure, you don't have to actually eat as long as you're delight. It's a delight to you. So, but according to Rabbi Yossi, it says that every Erev Shabbos and every Yontif, you are allowed to eat even past the mincha time. So, this is only true for Erev Shabbos and Erev Yontif, where Rabbi Yossi says, go ahead, eat before Shabbos and Yontif. You'll enter Shabbos, you'll be delighted with your stuffedness, and that's going to be full, and that's going to be okay. But for Pesach, you have to eat the matzah, and you have to eat the matzah in a manner that it counts as eating, and even better, that it should be a delight when you're eating it. That beautifies the mitzvah, and therefore you don't eat in order to have an appetite. Pesach, mishum chiyuva the matzah. Rabbi Yossi will agree that because of the obligation of the Torah obligation of eating the matzah that night, Moida Rabbi Yossi agrees. So that's Rav Huna's explanation of why we need our Mishnah, in spite of the fact that we already have this concept in the name of Rabbi Yehuda all year round. But for Shabbos, that's for Shabbos and Yontif. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He does not disagree. He admits, and our Mishnah is in Rabbi Yossi's opinion, that even according to Rabbi Yossi, Erev Pesach, one may not eat min mincha l'mayla. Rav Papa Amar Afilo Tamer Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Papa says, "What? You missed a word in the brisa." Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, Erev Pesach we need a Mishnah, because it's only from the time of mincha itself. At the time of mincha, where now you have an obligation to daven. So you, in general, once you have an obligation to daven, you may not eat, because as a general rule we have, and this is also applied to the Megillah that we just passed, that when you have a mitzvah to do, you cannot sit down to a meal, because you may eat and forget the mitzvah. So you're not supposed to eat before checking for chametz, which is what the Masechta began with, that on the night of the 13th, you're going into the 14th, you have to check your house for chametz. As soon as you daven Ma'ariv, you check your house. You may not eat before that, because if you do, you may sit down and have a meal and forget the mitzvah you have to do. So you're not allowed to eat. The same for mincha, and you're not allowed to eat. You have a mitzvah to do to daven. You can't sit down to a meal until you've davened mincha, unless you have a set time. There are somebody a reminder, whatever the exceptions to that rule is. So since there's a general rule, you may not you may not eat from mincha time, because you have to daven. That's a general rule every day. And so over here on Erev Pesach, even if you've already davened, on account of matzah, that stays in place. And from mincha, on account of Shabbos and Yontif, that remains in place, and you may not eat from the time of mincha, which is the time that normally on every day you can't eat until you've davened. And Tosfos points out, even if you've already davened, you may not daven mincha. Nevertheless, you may not eat from that time and on, in order to ensure that you enter Shabbos and enter Yontif with an appetite. However, for Erev Pesach, it's even earlier than that. But a half hour before mincha, you're allowed to eat. But before the evening before Pesach, Even close to mincha, even a half hour beforehand, at the beginning of the 10th hour, you may have to stop eating. So now the Gemara challenges that. Is that really true? That Erev Shabbos, it's from the mincha time itself and not from a half hour prior? That's not true. Vatanya, we have a brisa, a text that says it differently. A person shall not eat Erev Shabbos and Erev Yontif from 9 hours and onward, so that he can enter Shabbos when he has an appetite. And over here, it says from the 9 hours on. Now, 9 hours is not the time of mincha; it's a half hour prior to mincha, meaning the end of the 9th hour, the beginning of the 10th hour is the time that a half hour prior to mincha. So we see that even Rabbi Yehuda, who says on Erev Shabbos, Erev Yontif, we can't eat, is speaking about the not actually at the mincha time, which is 9.5 hours into the day, meaning the middle of the 10th hour. No, it's after 9 hours, the beginning of the 10th hour. Rabbi Yossi, and again, Rabbi Yossi disagrees on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yontif. So we have two brises. One text says from mincha time and on. One says from the end of 9 hours and on, meaning the beginning of the 10th hour, which is a half hour prior to that. And you, Rav Papa, wanted to make a distinction between Erev Pesach and Erev Shabbos, that Erev Shabbos you can eat from mincha time, you can eat up until mincha time. That and Erev Pesach you have to stop already a half hour before that. Actually, we have a text in a brisa that says even Erev Shabbos you have to stop a half hour beforehand. Amar Mar Zutra. So Mar Zutra said, well, we have a contradiction in the brises. Who tells you that this brisa is more a correct text than the other? Man who tells you that this brisa is a correct text? And now we go to 100a, Kufa Med Aleph, Dilma Mishabeshti. Maybe this latter brisa that you brought is actually the wrong text. Amalei Meremar, Vitema Rav Yemar, either Meremar or Rav Yemar, they had a similar name, so it was confused. One of them responded to the Mar Zutra and said, no, it can't be. It can't be that this latter text is incorrect. Because Rav Ami's son, Rav Pinchas, had a academy session where he was teaching. And somebody stood up and taught this brisa, and quoted this brisa in front of him. And he accepted the text as is, meaning from the end of the 9th hour, beginning of the 10th hour. So we see even Erev Shabbos and Erev Yontif, you may not eat from a half hour prior to mincha, which is exactly like our Mishnah. So you can't make a distinction between Shabbos and Yontif and Pesach by saying, oh, Shabbos you have to stop at mincha time, and Erev Pesach you have to stop a half hour beforehand, even because actually Erev Shabbos is the same halacha. So therefore we do have a similarity between Shabbos and Pesach, and we're going to have to ask the question again, why then do we have a special Mishnah for Shabbos? Rather, it's like Rav Huna to bring us the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Tomorrow we'll continue with this discussion of Rav Yossi and Rav Yossi's opinion of stopping for Shabbos, the halacha of stopping eating before Shabbos, etc. But for today, this is a very relevant halacha. The Mishnah said you may not eat from mincha and on. What may one not eat? So the simple meaning, the halacha is that it may not eat matzah. Now, matzah may not eat bread. Now, what kind of bread would this person not eat? You can't eat a meal anyhow. Matzah, one's not allowed to eat because we know our custom is not to eat matzah from the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, in the month of Nisan. Some people have the custom even already now from Purim, from 30 days beforehand, not to eat matzah. Some people have a custom not to eat matzah the week of Pesach, whatever the custom is. But the halacha is that you may not eat matzah the day of on the 14th day, because it says that you eat matzah that evening, and it's like a glutton who can't wait for the time of the mitzvah. They eat it. So whatever the case is, the halacha is one may not eat matzah on the 14th. So you can't sit down to a meal of matzah in any case. And the halacha is that you may not eat bread, obviously, because it's already past the time of eating chametz. So in any case, there's no meal to be eaten. So what are we talking about? it can't. Tosfos asks, it can't be matzah because in any case you're not allowed to eat matzah, and it can't be chametz because you're not going to eat chametz anyhow, because you're not allowed to eat chametz. So what does it mean you're not allowed to eat? So Tosfos says it means egg matzah. Matzah that has anything but flour and water cannot fulfill the mitzvah. And therefore, you're not allowed. Tosfos says you would be allowed to eat that. However, you're not allowed to eat that on account of that it is on account of that it is you're going to be full and not have an appetite for the matzah in the evening. However, many poskim, and one sheet in the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch and the Gra paskins, there's ways that you're not allowed to eat even. The Rambam says that you're not even allowed to eat matzah ashira. On the 14th day, any matzah form may not be eaten on account of that. On account of that, it's the day of eating matzah. It's not just about the matzah that's a fulfillment of the mitzvah, but any form of matzah is going to take away from the specialty of the matzah that evening. So you may not eat any matzah at all on the 14th day of Nisan, Erev Pesach. So you can't eat chametz and you can't eat matzah. So what is the meaning of this halacha? Michael, you have a question?
Yeah, does that include like knedlach? Does that include like matzah rolls? Anything made out of matzah meal? Is that included in this sak?
No. So it seems like that matzah meal, knedlach, and other foods that are made out of matzah meal. So you had a biscotti or a matzah ball or something that would not necessarily be included in this. Although there is an opinion that says even that's prohibited, that I don't think is the prevalent custom. But so what is the meaning over here that it says not to eat? So the other opinions say that what it means is that even though you're allowed to eat snacks, you can eat a fruit that wouldn't be prohibited eating because that's not going to hinder your appetite for the evening. It's just sort of going to get you through until the eating of the matzah. Nevertheless, you shouldn't eat a lot of that. You shouldn't fill yourself on mine targima, on even a non-meal foods. Somebody can fill itself, and that's what it means. That a person should limit, even if though that later we're going to see you are allowed to eat certain foods that are going to be non-bread meal, meaning not chametz anyhow, and not matzah, and also not matzah ashira. And this is very relevant for this year because the halacha is that on Shabbos, you're supposed to have 3 meals. One meal would be Friday night, one meal Shabbos morning, and one meal Shabbos afternoon. However, when Shabbos comes up on a Yontif, or specifically in this year, where Shabbos, Erev Pesach is Shabbos, so you have to have Suda Shlishis, you have to have a third meal. How are you going to have a third meal if you can't eat in the afternoon? So some people have the custom, what they're going to do is split the morning meal. And that has halachic difficulties of its own. The halacha is you're not allowed to cause yourself to make a bracha that's not necessary. You're in the middle of a meal. You plan to eat in 15 minutes, continue this meal, and you're going to split the meal, bench, say the after bracha, intention that in 10 minutes you're sitting down again for this meal, and you're just going to walk out for a short walk and come back in, and that's going to be your third meal. Halachically, there are those that say that's not an appropriate way of splitting your morning meal in order to have a Suda Shlishis, a third meal on Shabbos, is inappropriate because you're actually causing unnecessary brachas. Nevertheless, those that say that is a valid way of doing it because you intend to break, you're going to take a walk, you come back in. That's not a bracha she'eina tzricha. It's not an unnecessary bracha because you've made it necessary, and that would be and in order to fulfill the third meal on Shabbos, that would be one way of doing it. Others actually just have a meal in the afternoon, and they do that by having matzah ashira, egg matzah. Now, even though there are those that say that you can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with egg matzah because the matzah that you're going to fulfill the mitzvah with on the night of the Seder has to be just flour and water and nothing else. At lechem oni, the poor man's bread, we've seen that before in the Masechta. So too, this obligation of eating Suda Shlishis the prohibition of eating matzah on the 14th would only be matzah that you're fulfilling the mitzvah with that night, and you can't fulfill the matzah with the mitzvah of matzah with egg matzah. So you can eat that in the afternoon, and so you're allowed to eat that as your suda shlishis, your third meal, as long as you finish before the 9th hour. However, those that say that this too, since it's problematic, that you fulfill the obligation of eating your third meal by eating mine targima, that when you can't eat a bread meal in the afternoon of Shabbos, you can fulfill your obligation of the third meal by eating some fruit, some grapes, and with that you fulfill the obligation. So this would be another way of Suda Shlishis, of fulfilling the third meal, which is a relevant halacha for this year and comes out of this Mishnah, where you're not allowed to eat in the afternoon a sit-down meal, samach l'mincha. We mentioned the halacha that you can only eat once it's. Yes, Michael.
What are you doing?
That's the way I fulfill it, just with the eating snack. That's the way my father did it and grandfather. And so we don't have a third meal. We have a meal in the morning as our Shabbos meal, and finish eating. We complete eating the chametz by the time that the chametz needs to be completed. And obviously, you have to make sure there's no leftovers and the crumbs gets flushed down the toilet. You do all of the burning of the chametz and everything already before Shabbos on the 13th. And then you just leave whatever you need for the Friday night meal and the Shabbos meal, minimal chametz, and only that which is needed for the meal, and try to have something that's not as crummy. Try to get a bread or a challah that's not going to leave a lot of crumbs. Eat over something that's not going to, because the house is all Pesach to go already. So you're just going to eat that Friday night and Shabbos day. And then for Suda Shlishis, for the third meal, because it's Erev Pesach, we just have some fruit and fulfill the obligation with that. The halacha was that we saw that you can't eat until the evening. So even though the Mishnah says that you cannot eat the matzah until the evening, and I mentioned that also the telling of the story of the kiddush and the story may not be said until that evening as well, as we say in the Haggadah, perhaps even from while it's still day. Talmud loimer ba'avur zeh, what at the b'shasha matzah mara munachim lefanecha. Now it's interesting. It says at the time the matzah mar is sitting in front of you. It should say at the time the matzah mar are being eaten, right? That's the time the matzah mar are being eaten. So the Chassam Sofer is of the opinion, and he says it over here on this Mishnah, because it says you can't eat until nightfall, that you can actually make Kiddush from when the sun sets, even though it's not yet nightfall. It is not the prevalent halacha. The prevalent halacha is that even for Kiddush, you have to wait until nightfall, because Kiddush is one of the four mitzvahs, the four cups, and it's a mitzvah of the night. And so just like all the rest of it, it must be done at night. Also, as we say in the Haggadah, that the telling of the story also is balayla hazeh, just as the term by the eating of the Korban Pesach, it says, v'achlos habasa balayla hazeh, you will eat the meat this night, the very night. It has to be nightfall when you eat the meat. And the matzah and maror also, it says, is eaten together with the Pesach, al matzah samarorim rechlu, so that too has to be eaten only at night. And the telling of the story, even though that the text of the Brisa, which we say in the Haggadah, is when it's sitting in front of you, not when you're allowed to eat it, but nevertheless, sitting in front of you means that it's the order. You first tell the story and then you eat the matzah, and so it's sitting in front of you. It's lechem oni, we saw earlier in the Gemara, it's lechem sha'onim alav dvarim harbe. These words of the telling of the story have to be told on the matzah, so that too is balayl hazeh, in this night, and the telling of the story, the Haggadah, also has to be done at night. And so Kiddush also has to be at night. That's the prevalent halacha, that the beginning of Kiddush can only start once it's halachic nightfall from this Mishnah, and the beginning where you cannot eat. You have to stop eating from the 9th hour, and you cannot eat until it actually is nightfall. You cannot do any of the mitzvahs of the night, and the 4 cups as well. Tomorrow we'll continue with Daf Kuf, the continuation of Rabbi Yossi's opinion of not eating for before Shabbos, and the relevant halachas to the Seder. Yeshakach for